So hello, we will now discuss vector semantics. Until now, we have covered about the basic pre-processing while dealing with the natural language text, and then we have discussed about language models. So now we will change the topic and we will discuss about the vector semantics. Uh, in this we are going to discuss that in vector semantics essentially we are interested in looking at how to represent each of these words into a real dimensional vector space. As you know that often when you want to use any machine learning methods, we have to obtain a vector representation. We have to give as an input a vector, and for those ob- objective or for those purpose, we have to sort of look for methods which allow us to convert a vector word into vector representation. So before looking into the methods, we need to understand that what we are going to expect from these vector representations and what is the meaning of words. Based on that, we will try to build some sort of an intuition that how we can define or look for methods which can lead to a vector representation of words. So in vector semantics, essentially we talk about models to obtain or learn the representation of meaning of words. And these representations are learned using distribution of words in text. In fact, the vector representation of words are an example of what we call a representation learning. Representation learning means that we are trying to learn features directly from raw data. So, in the context of natural language processing, um, the raw data is basically the text, and from those texts, somehow we need to look for the methods which gives us vector representations, and we don't try to define or hand engineer as such the hand engineer the you can say the features or what could be the features for each of the words. We try to obtain its representation directly from the data. Uh, So that's an vector representation. There are models which are and a good example of representation learning in the context of the word vector representation. And often these methods are also called the embeddings. So word embeddings. So I will kind of use either word embedding or the vector representation interchangeably. So it essentially means the same thing. Now let's come back to the important question that when we try to obtain these representations, we need to represent the meaning of words through these whatever the vectors we are obtaining. So now the question is, what are these different aspects of meaning? Uh, So in fact, the lexical semantics is the field which try to study the linguistic field, which try to study the word meaning and the various aspects of the meaning of the words. So, for example, if we want to obtain a representation of word, then we would expect, these representation should do all sort of things, such as whether the two words are similar, whether two words are antonyms, whether there are some positive annotations associated with these words. So we will discuss in a little bit more detail about these various aspects of meaning. So, in fact, the lexical semantics is the field which actually does that. And for us, it's important to study because unless we understand these various aspects of meaning of words, we will not be able to evaluate these, the different models. Because and we will not know that what is the expectation from these representations, and how should we really evaluate them on different from the different angles. So that is why I decided first let's discuss about these various aspects of word meanings, and then go about discussing the methods. Let's talk about the meaning of the words. So there are, often we see the words and which has, the several meanings. So what we call is that they have the multiple senses, and what we call is the polysemy. So for example, when we talk about when you hear a word class, now this class, if there's only this word is there class, then we are not sure whether we are talking about a teaching group, whether we are talking about economic group or some sort of a rank we are talking about. When we talk about the word right, so whether we are saying whether we mean that something has been said correctly or written correctly, or we are talking about direction. And so, with many of the words, these multiple senses are associated, and how we can perhaps obtain these different, either we have to represent a different representation corresponding to each of these senses, and if you want to do that, how we can do that. So in fact, there's a lot of work which talks about this word sense disambiguation, and that is what it actually do, that it looks for different meaning of words, or the different senses of the words, and how we can distinguish one sense from the another. Although I am not going to discuss this, but if some of you are interested, you should look into the relevant work associated with the word sense disambiguation. There is something called the synonymous words, where as all of you know that the the sense associated with one word is a very same or identical or near identical sense of another word. So, for example, when you talk about cot or sofa, they are essentially means the same, and so on. Uh, and these words are like, you can, once you change or substitute one word with its synonymous word, essentially the meaning, or what we call say the truth condition of the sentence, remain unchanged. Uh, and then the reverse is with the antonyms, where the meanings are opposite. Uh, so again, the just to remind you that the idea of this is to sort of highlight that with respect to a word, there are multiple relations which exist, or there are multiple meanings of the words, we can say, and we should be aware of that. So until now we have talked about this, the polysemy, which essentially is that with one word we have multiple senses. Then we have talked about synonymous and the antonyms. Uh, then there are you know as there's some notion or there's some relation among the words which are beyond, let's say, the synonyms and antonyms, and what we say that these are the similar words, uh, and they are uh, often mm, they are not perhaps the synonyms in true sense, but they are have a very similar meanings, or they occur in a you know in a similar kind of word environment and so on. So so, for example, the cat, dog. I mean, so these are like not synonymous to each other, or neither antonyms of each other, but uh, they are. Whenever we talk about pet animals, often the cat and dogs can come in a similar kind of an environment. So they are related. Uh, so again for the they are important to we should understand this kind of relation among the words, because when we for example, you want to do the task of paraphrase detection, or you want to do the summarization, then these relation between the words comes now play a significant role to check that how these uh, whenever you have some certain representations, and how those reflects this kind of a similarity relation among the words. Uh, Often there are some benchmark data sets, and using that people try to judge. So one example of this data is called the Simlex, which has been created in 2015. And here the linguists look into multiple pair of words, and in fact the multiple linguists look into that, and each of them has sort of a scale from 0 to 10 for each pair of the words, that how similar they are. And so the numbers close to the 10 indicates that they are very similar, they are near synonyms and so on. And if they are close to 0, that means they are not, they don't have any sort of relation with each other. So this is just an few examples to show that how these relations exist, and what kind of a score has been given in this particular Simlex data set. Then there are the words which are related in a much more bigger sense. So they are not, in some sense similar, but they are associated in some sense. So, so for example, like the student teacher. So they are not related in the same way as the cat or the dog are related. So the cat or dog are similar words, uh, but the student and teacher are not, essentially similar words, because they don't have a similar kind of a role to play. But how they are related? They are related because they are participating, or they are co-participants in a shared event. So they are participating in an event, in a common event. And associated with this, the relatedness or association, there are two concepts. Something called One is called a semantic frame, and another one is a semantic field. So let's mm, discuss about the semantic field. The semantic field is a set of words covering a particular semantic domain, and where you see the structured relation among them. So, for example, when we talk about a university, then there are many words which are not. You see that these words are not similar. So, the teacher, student, study, class, lecture, assignment, project. Uh, this group of words are related or associated in the domain of university. So the university is which is kind of covers this bigger this field, and the words which are very commonly appearing, in that environment, they are have some sort of association with each other. In fact, there is a great deal of work on the models, something called like the topic modeling, which you can say is an example of to try to identify, for example, if you have given a set of documents, to identify these that what are the different topics which have been discussed in these documents, and how these words belongs to the, with what percentage or what probability distribution these words belongs to these topics. Uh, so that's a kind of a, the more uh, formal way or more systematic way to sort of understand the semantic field. Uh, in terms of, let's say, the modeling, but while we discuss as a kind of a, what we mean by the semantic field, this is what actually is that, you have a word set of the words which cover a particular domain, and they have some sort of a structured relation among them. uh, then related to this is something called a semantic frame, where uh, when you are talking about a particular event, and then there's in that particular event, within a, let's say that while describing those event, you have used certain words, and among those there are many words which has, very specific roles to play, or what we call semantic roles to play. So in that context, we will say that it's a semantic frame. uh, so, for example, if you have the commercial transaction, so then there is a role, that there is some person who is playing a role of buyer. There's another person who is playing a role of seller. Then some object which is being sold or purchased, and then there is the monetary transactions involved there. So there are different roles to be played here, and then, these all of these things are, sort of kind of in a local, in the context, you can say that within a one sentence or two sentence you have these things. So that's what you can say the semantic frame. You are talking about an event type or particular event in a very smaller context, while the semantic domain or semantic field which we have discussed, it's more in a kind of in a larger context, and much bigger context. So while taking this class, I'm teaching, and you, as you are listening, and you are a student, you are trying to learn. So we are talking about a very simple specific event, and then these events are being described in one or two sentences, and within that we are trying to fix a role of different agents. Similarly, with the the doctor patients, and so on. So that's what the semantic frame, in the semantic frame you have. And again, you can sort of understand that we have to understand these things, that how in a larger context, how these words are related, in the smaller context, how these words are related. And then, when you're, for example, looking again as a paraphrasing detection, uh, you have to sort of have to have this understanding that these what are different roles to be played by the different agents. Then there is another a taxonomic relation among the words, where one word is a kind of a subordinate or hyphonym of the other word. If the first word is kind of a more specific. So, for example, when we talk about a car and when we talk about a vehicle, the car is a subordinate or hyponym of vehicle. So when we talk about something which is very, very specific, so then and then something which is very generic. So the specific thing is a hyponym of the generic thing. So vehicle is a general word for any kind of different types of the vehicles are there, and the car is just one type. Similarly, when we talk about the fruits, there are so many different types of the fruits, but then mango is just one example of a fruit. So the mango is specific, and then that's a kind of an so the mango uh, is a type of a fruit. Car is a type of vehicle, and this is something what we call is a hierarchy or is a relation or a taxonomic relation. And once you converse them, then it becomes a superordinate or the hypernym relation. So again, there are, let's say, mm, for example, to understand these relations between the words, uh, there's a huge, you know, mm, effort to build specifically for the English language. There is this wordnet hierarchy, and I will sort of suggest you to explore that wordnet hierarchy, where the words are kind of arranged in a hierarchical order based on this kind of relations. And then if there's some words which are having the similar meaning, so they are clubbed together. And if some word is a again the subordinate or hyponym of other, so then they have put into this kind of an hierarchy. So that wordnet is a kind of an example where many of these relations are put into a very structured format. And then there are not only wordnet hierarchy or wordnet resources available for English. Of course, for English it's much more rich than compared to the other languages. And again, as I speak, don't consider these relations among the words that they are kind of distinct, or there is a kind of a very crisp boundary exists between, let's say, that the similar words and then the words which are related. It's not like that. I mean, we just want to give a notion, and now that okay, these kind of relations exist. And sometimes when we talk about a word similarity, it's not exactly as a word relatedness, but still the two words which are similar, they might get some kind of a score in 0 to 10 scale something. And when we talk about those words for the relatedness, then they might again, the same pair of the words might get some score on the relatedness scale. So again, don't try to think that these are a very distinct, or there exists some kind of an crisp boundary. But what we need to understand here is, and what I want to highlight, that there are some sort of what we call is that some different type of these relations exist among the words. And while trying to look for any kind of a representation in real dimensional space, we should be aware that we should expect those representations to reflect those kind of relations. See, for example, why people look into the word sense disambiguation. I mean, if we don't know or don't care that the words can have multiple senses, and then in every time if the class appears, I might want to have just one representation. But then that one representation may not be a good example, because that one class representation might be more suitable to a teaching group and not to the, let's say, that an economic group. And if the class word appears to reflect or show this economic group, then this representation of the teaching group is not going to be a good representation for that word. So that is why we have to be aware of these things, and then we should think that in our model how we can take care of these issues. Uh, and then there's another relation, what we call is the connotation. So, for example, when you want to do this sentiment analysis, often we try to look for words which reflects kind of in a positive or negative sense. For so. The connotation is that, the aspects of the word meaning which deals with the writers or readers' emotions, opinions, or evaluations. So when we talk about when we see the word happy, then there is, of course, is a positive connotation, and then when we see that there is a sad, then it has a negative connotation. The great, then there is a positive evaluation, and then when we talk about terrible, and then there is a negative evaluation. Now, some of you can say that sometimes there are some kind of sarcastic comments, and then these words can appear. I mean, those are again is a difficult task to detect that whether the happy, for example, somebody is sort of said in a very sarcastic manner that now are you happy, or I am very happy, and in a very sarcastic sense. So those are like the emotions which have been sort of reflected. We may have to perhaps look into the other kind of signals to understand that it's more on a sarcastic sense, and not to the to reflect the positive connotations. But that is, let's say, left aside. Often, I mean, what I want to highlight here is there are words which reflects the positive or negative connotations, positive evaluation or negative evaluation, and so on. And to again, uh, we would like to have this kind of a reflection coming out from my vector representation. Uh, the perhaps this is maybe one of the first attempts to represent the words in real dimensional vector space. So the Osgood in about in 1957, he tried to look for for every word, he wanted to associate these connotations with in three dimensions. So he defined something called the valence, arousal, and dominance, and each of them has a different kind of things to reflect on. So valence, which looks for the pleasantness of the stimulus; arousal, which looks into the intensity of the emotions provoked by the stimulus; and the dominance, which is how much the degree is of the control which is exerted by the stimulus. So for example, the happy, which is high on the valence, and the annoyed, which is low on the valence, because with the annoyed there's a no pleasantness. So that is why the annoyed has a low valence. And similarly, the calm, you there's a not much of the intensity, and it's more like in a neutral. So then it has sort of the low on arousal. On the other hand, the controlling, there is a lot of the control is there, so that has a high on dominance. Based on this idea, each of the words were sort of again linguists try to put them into this on this on the three dimensions of the valence, arousal, and dominance. Try to put some number in the scale of 0 to 10 to reflect that, and from there you can sort of look for the connotations associated with each of the words. So you can say that this is I mean, although the intention may not be to obtain a vector representation, but yes, there was a kind of an attempt to reflect the different you know uh, you can say the property or of words associated with the words, in a multiple dimensions, and then project each of these words into these different dimensions. So that's what I mean, this work was trying to reflect, and then that's kind of gives us the motivation to go for instead of defining uh, you know by by the experts that what value one should give in a particular dimension, uh, how we can learn that from data. So that's what I mean. That Until now, what we have discussed basically that what kind of relations exist among the words, and now the question is how we going to use some of this knowledge about these word meanings to obtain an appropriate representation. So that's the first part of the lecture. And in the next part, we are going to see that how or what motivates or how we get an idea to obtain a vector representation and what is the intuition which works behind these different models.